Tonight's show is brought to you by The Ultimate Production Tutorial. If you like what you see and you want to know more about film production, please follow the website link in the description below to learn more. While you're there, you can check out my show notes, where you can double-check my references, comment, and act like the film critic I know you are. Also, all of the items on the website are affiliate links, so if you find anything of interest, please click on through. Finally, please subscribe, follow, like, share, comment, pray, and send good vibes to help us keep delivering great content. And now, on with the show. Welcome to another edition of Movie Night Madness. I'm your host, Sisyphus Jones. I'm joined by my co-host and research partner, Doc Rock. How you doing, Rock? What's going on?
Hey, I'm doing good, man. We're checking out a very awesome movie, and I'm jazzed because watching it with like-minded people who now see that can see the elements of what we're into in this movie.
Yeah, for sure. On tonight's agenda, we'll have a short presentation about the trivia and some of the production that went into tonight's film. Then we'll watch the movie, and then we'll have a post-movie conversation about what we watched, about what was presented, about whatever. Tonight's film, we're watching James Bond Moonraker, and it was directed by Louis Gilbert. The writers were Christopher Wood, Ian Fleming, and Gary Anderson. Christopher Wood really did most of the writing in the film. It's an Ian Fleming story, but you'll understand what I mean by that. It stars Roger Moore, Lois Chiles, and Michael Lonsdale. And this is the 11th movie in the James Bond series. At the end of the credits of the previous movie, The Spy Who Loved Me, James Bond says, James Bond will return for your eyes only. So that was the movie that was supposed to be made instead of Moonraker. But because of the box office success of the 1977 Star Wars, the producers were like, oh, we want to make some money with this, so let's do a Star Wars theme. And they wrote this Moonraker story, which was what was made instead of For Your Eyes Only. Moonraker has two dictionary definitions. One means the high sail on the ship. It's the moon sail, or also known as the Moonraker. And it also sometimes refers to an extremely ambitious man. And this would apply to either Bond or Drax, the antagonist. The ratings on Rotten Tomatoes, it's really low, and the IMDb rating is also quite low for that many votes. And it's kind of weird because a lot of the financial information shows something completely different than the ratings. So I think that these ratings are judging the movies compared to today's Bonds and not compared to the Bond that was then. Because this had a very large budget at a time. It was a $36 million movie, which is equivalent to more than the first 8 Bond movies combined. And that adjusted today is $141 million. The world box office was $210 back then, which is equivalent to $827 million today, which is huge for film, even today. And that is approximately 83 million tickets sold. No Time to Die, which was the 2021 Bond movie. I couldn't compare it to anything else in Bond because Bond is its own kind of film. Had a budget of $351 million. And it made $760 million worldwide. So Moonraker had a return of investment of 578% to the original budget, and the latest version barely made twice the budget, which is nuts. I don't understand how Hollywood math works anymore, and that's probably the reason why they're crashing and burning.
That's part of it.
That's part of it. So this movie won an Oscar for Best Visual Effects. Derek Meddings, a genius that we'll check out in just a second. It's very loosely based on Ian Fleming's novel called Moonraker, which was published in 1955. This was the third Bond book, and it has nothing to do with the movie. The movie and the book are completely different. This book was originally supposed to be a film. Ian Fleming had always seen it as a film, and he wrote the screenplay before having written the book. This is also the last Bond novel to receive a screen adaptation until everything was rebooted with Casino Royale in 2006. The novel and the movie are entirely two different things completely. The difference is the novel, the story of Hugo Drax in the novel is a Nazi who wants to destroy London with a Moonraker missile armed with a nuclear warhead. The novel is widely considered to be one of James Bond's best stories. In the movie, Drax is not a Nazi, but retains the sort of master race ideology thing. Also, the scene where Bond and Dr. Goodhead are trapped inside the exhaust duct underneath a rocket and are nearly burnt to death. That was both in the book and the movie, to really confuse things. So the book is completely different than the film. But the film was so different that they accepted to make a novelization of this film. So there's both the book, the movie, and then the book from the film, the book that was created from the film. It's kind of confusing. So the production in this film was completely epic. Much of the film was shot in 7 different countries, in cities like London, Paris, France, Venice, Palmdale, California, Port St. Lucie, Florida, and Rio de Janeiro. The frantic pace of production ensued the film's release schedules. Usually with Bond films specifically, they choose the date of release before the movie's even made. So the producers are tied to a specific date. And the reason why is because during that particular release, very important people like the Queen of England or the King of England show up at the openings for those films. The script was built around the places they decided to shoot. As far as the production is concerned, the production unit traveled over 100,000 miles through 7 countries, 3 continents, and worked in 4 different kinds of studios. Took 32 boats to travel place to place. Hired 5 different helicopters and used 5 different helicopters for the kind of shoots they were doing. And there were 80 transport vehicles used to carry the crew around, the actors, and so on and so forth. These are the various places that you can find. I have visited this particular castle. I didn't realize that it was in this film. They took this castle, cut it out, and stuck it in the Mojave Desert. So you'll see this castle in a slightly different place. It doesn't have all the trees around it. This is a Sugarloaf Mountain in Brazil. Another thing that was very exciting about the film was that they got to shoot within the interior of certain places in Venice, which has never been done or doesn't ever really get done. Because it was a Bond film, the producer said Bond opens many doors. So because it was a Bond film, Venice allowed them to shoot a couple of scenes inside some of the palaces in Venice. And also, in this particular boat chase scene, the canals have a 5-knot speed limit. They sort of got away with doing a chase scene in the middle of Venice when one shouldn't have happened, essentially. So this is the director. He's made 42 different films. He's known for Alfie, Operation Daybreak, Haunted, and Educating Rita. He's also directed 3 Bond films. The Spy Who Loved Me would be one of them, and You Only Live Twice would be the other, and then obviously Moonraker. He turned down the opportunity to direct Her Majesty's Secret Service. After the high production costs of Moonraker, United Artists was unable to hire him anymore because he was too expensive to United Artists to film the rest. This is Derek Meddings. Derek Meddings, I bring him up because he's an amazing special effects person. He's responsible for the special effects in Batman, GoldenEye. He did all the episodes, the special effects of Thunderbirds, and the original Superman. And the original Superman had some groundbreaking effects on its own, actually. I bring him up not specifically because there was super groundbreaking special effects in this film. There were, but compared to Star Wars that came out 2 years before, this one doesn't come close. But one of the things that I found absolutely amazing was because of the time constraints in the film to get the film done. This is called an optical printer. Essentially, you put your movie reels here, the ones that were shot and printed, and it projects it onto a tiny little screen, and then you've got another camera here that films what is projected. So you can make a copy of the film. So they've been using a machine that looks like this since the 1920s to do all kinds of special effects. This is obviously a very high quality version of the machine. Some of the machines are much older and much smaller. So instead of using that, because of the time constraints, they didn't use a machine like this. All the in-space special effects were done using a method called double exposure. Double exposure essentially is you take a picture or you run your film through once, and it's underexposed a couple of stops. And then you run it through again with another image, and you've got this particular effect that happens. Every single effect that the space scenes was done in camera. So they would rewind the film every time and add an extra element, and then rewind the film and add an extra element. Some scenes took 80 windbacks. They wound the film 80 times to get the effects they wanted. It's completely insane. So yeah, to get these particular effects, it took 80 times to wind it back into the camera and then get it so that the spaceship moves, so get it so that you can get the glow on the Earth, get it so you can get the Earth, get it so that the spaceship is turning around, that kind of stuff. In the most climactic scene in space, where the spaceship is being blown up, they decided to get these particular kind of effects on the model in the spaceship. They shot it with buckshot. They were shooting the miniature with shotguns. So I like that kind of creative destruction. Ken Adams. What can we say about Ken Adams? Ken Adams is the set designer extraordinaire. He is so well known that Pinewood Studios, which is the James Bond movie studio, has a building named directly after him. He won an Academy Award. He's an Academy Award winner for Best Set Design for Barry Lyndon, and he's a veteran of 7 different James Bond films. And these are some of the other films that he's also worked on. I don't have all the James Bond films. I couldn't find all of them for some reason. I looked through the list a couple times. I guess I personally don't know all the James Bonds that are there. Ken Adams, for this specific film, he constructed 50 different sets, and it was estimated that the build for all of the sets in the movie took approximately 220,000 hours. The 3-tier, so it was three-story space station, was the biggest set ever constructed at the time, 108 feet by 47 feet, and it took 220 technicians 8 weeks to build. The gigantic 3-level space station took 2 tons of nails, 1 ton of metal, 220 technicians, like I said, and 10,000 feet of construction wood of 2x4s. Stunts. So there's a lot of really cool action sequences in this film, but I need to point this one out. The jumping out of the plane scene is absolutely insane because they only had 60 seconds, 70 seconds of free fall time. So to put this 2-minute scene together, they needed to jump out of the plane 88 times, and it took 6 weeks to shoot. A special camera rig was developed using a lightweight Panavision plastic anamorphic lens because the camera needed to be super light. It couldn't be any more than 15 pounds because when the parachute ripped open, they were afraid that the cameraman skydiver was going to have his neck snapped if it was any heavier than 15 pounds. The fight between James Bond and Chang is done in Venice in the Glass Arts Museum. They rebuilt this in a studio, and it looks very, very similar to the one that's in Venice. This is actually shot in Paris because they brought the glass from England. This holds the record for the most amount of sugar glass used in a scene. There were 600 different pieces of glass created for this scene, and they smashed the whole thing. The conspiracy. Now to the good stuff. The topics covered in this film, we got Epstein-style breeding stock to create a superhuman, gene-specific bioweapons, stolen shuttle, sort of like the stolen F-35 that happened this week, depopulation, secret space program, breakaway civilization, the Mandela effect, and Space Force. Quick word on the Mandela effect. A lot of people remember this movie with Dolly, who's a sort of weird cameo at the end where Jaws falls in love with braces. But there's no proof that there's ever been braces in the film. She appears like this in the film. Mandela effect is, for those who don't know, is basically a conspiracy theory that posits that somehow our reality, our timeline has been altered somewhere in the past. So like 2012, all of a sudden we moved into a different timeline, and the things that we remember, like Berenstain Bears or this particular scene, is different than what it was in reality. The VHS, the DVD, and the Blu-ray version of the home video Dolly does not have braces. She herself, in an interview in 2016, said that she never wore braces in the film. Some fans in 1979, even they said in the Los Angeles Times, the Los Angeles Times film critic Charles Champlin said that Keel even requires a love interest, a small, voluptuous blonde named Blanche Ravillec.
His character's
I'm
name is
sorry.
Dolly.
Yeah, whose character's name is Dolly. I'm sorry, I didn't have the rest of that quote, but essentially, the film critic says, "If only she had braces." That particular film critic. So it's sort of weird. I don't remember this. I don't know whether or not this is a Mandela effect. I watched these movies when I was a kid. But if she doesn't have braces, I can only blame the writers, because you'll see the scene. This is a terrible Deus ex machina. There's no motivation. There's zero motivation for Dolly and Jaws to get together in the film. She just shows up and Jaws falls in love, and then Jaws becomes the good guy. So this is really lazy writing. And in fact, if she had braces, you could almost say, I can understand that. This makes sense to me. But in this case, she didn't. So I'm going to focus on. Well, yeah, it's weird logic. I don't quite get it. So I'm going to focus on depopulation. Of all those topics that were picked, I'm going to focus on depopulation because it was the one that sort of was most titillating when we were watching the film. So there's two ways reading on this particular topic. There are two serious ways we can talk about depopulation. One is demographic decline. There's a lot of paperwork that talks about the dangers of demographic decline, meaning we are not creating enough for a replacement rate, and a mass die-off will create some very, very difficult times for the people that are that are alive, because there's no replacement rate. So that would be problematic. And then the other way is overpopulation. So we need to actively be thinking about ways to depopulate, because overpopulation, you got the Malthusian problem of too many people, not enough resources, that kind of thing. So demographic decline can be defined as GDP, gross domestic product growth, that may grow even more slowly and even decline if the decline in total population is not matched by an equal or greater increase in productivity. So population decline, and there isn't more production that replaces that population decline, then the GDP will lower and everybody will be more poor because of that. The ways these things can manifest is a rise in dependency ratio, which would increase the economic pressure on the workforce. Dependency ratio would be like having older people depend on younger people. So there would be a rise in that. Loss of culture and diminishment of trust among citizens. Crisis in end-of-life care for elderly because they are insufficient caregivers to care for them. The difficulties funding entitlement programs because there are fewer workers relative to retirees. A decline in military strength, decline in innovation, since the change comes from the young. Yeah, innovation usually comes from the young, so there'd be a decline in innovation. Strain on mental health because of permanent recession, and then deflation. There would be a deflation because of the age in population. Overpopulation. The roots of this dates back to ancient times, but the very roots of the modern version of what we know of overpopulation, all the things that are written about it, comes from this guy Thomas Malthus, and he wrote a book called Essay on the Principles of Population. Malthus suggests that the technological advances could increase the population's supply of resources, such as food, and thereby improve standard of living, and abundance of resources would enable the population growth, which would eventually bring the supply back to its original level or make it worse because the technology could fail, so on and so forth. So basically what he's saying is more people, less resources, you'd have a problem, you'd create famines, you'd create crises in that particular way. So we need to control the population to ensure that we have the adequate amount of resources for everybody to live a prosperous life. He never got to see this prediction come true. So he wrote about it. He pushed this idea. He wrote 6 different versions of this particular essay. I would love to see what the difference is between each version and see whether or not he corrected himself on anything, but that's it. So that was 200 years ago. Today, or more recently, the guy who basically took exactly his text and wrote a book about it is a guy named Paul Ehrlich. The rhetoric is identical. In 1970, when he wrote the book, he confidently declared, by 1975, some experts feel that the food shortages will have escalated the present level of world hunger and starvation into famines of unbelievable proportions. Other experts, more optimistic, think that the ultimate food population collision will not occur until the decade of 1980s. He's still waiting for this to happen. This has not happened yet. The rhetoric today sounds more like this. This was a interview Ted Turner gave approximately 15 years ago.
We'll have 8 degrees. We'll be 8 degrees hotter in 30 or 40 years. And basically none of the crops will grow. Most of the people will have died, and the rest of us will be cannibals. Civilization will have broken down. What the few people who are left will be living in a failed state like Somalia or Sudan. And living conditions will be intolerable. The droughts will be so bad there'll be no more corn growing. Not doing it is suicide. Just like dropping bombs on each other, nuclear weapons is suicide. So we've got to stop doing the 2 suicidal things, which are hanging on to our nuclear weapons
and global.
And then after that, we've got to stabilize the population. When I was born, there were
so what's wrong with the population? I mean,
with too many people. That's why we have global warming. We have global warming because too many people are using too much stuff. But if there were less people, they'd be using less stuff. If we don't get global warming and the nuclear weapons straightened out, we don't have to worry about human rights. The humans will all be gone.
Okay.
600,000 nuclear bombs, Hiroshima nuclear bombs, blah, 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 blah. This is Al Gore.
He's Al Gore maniac. My God, he's a maniac.
Yeah.
We'll have 8 degrees.
Okay.
We'll be
and
8
then,
degrees.
Obviously, we all know this one.
And
it's
that
the same rhetoric, only just a slightly different excuse. It's not the...
CO2.
And we got another Bond villain here.
This equation has 4 factors, a little bit of multiplication. So you've got a thing on the left, CO2, that you want to get to 0. And that's going to be based on the number of people, the services each person's using on average, the energy on average for each service, and the CO2 being put out per unit of energy. So let's look at each one of these and see how we can get this down to 0. Probably one of these numbers is going to have to get pretty near to 0. That's back from high school algebra. But let's take a look. First, we've got population. The world today has 6.8 billion people. That's headed up to about 9 billion. Now, if we do a really great job on new vaccines, healthcare, reproductive health services, we could lower that by perhaps 10 or 15%. But there we see an increase of about 1.3.
Speaking of overpopulation, do we have an example? Do we have an example of what it would look like if we were actively trying to lower the population? Yes, we do. China's one-child policy that happened between 1980 and 2016, 1979 and 2015. They essentially were enforcing a one-child policy by giving fines to people who had an extra kid. So every day your kid was alive, or every year, I guess, you'd have to pay an extra fine if you had more than one child, and for every child. In certain cases, they would force abortions. So if you've had 2 kids and you're about to have a third, the state could come in and tell you to no, you're not allowed to have this kid. They could even do it on the second child, but I believe that the Wikipedia article that I got this information from tried to make it look, more kosher, I guess. And then forced sterilizing people who had more than one kid. So after your second kid, you were forced sterilized, so you can't have any more. China's fertility restrictions, like the one-child policy, is likely to have averted 500 million births between 1970 and 2015. Between 1980 and 2014, 324 million Chinese women received a forced IUD. So after your first child, they would install an IUD in your system. And 108 million women were sterilized after their first child. If a family had more than one child, sterilization of the surplus children would sometimes occur. Those who violated the one-child policy could lose their job, their titles, a portion of medical insurance, and opportunities for higher education for their first and second child. The one-child policy obviously created some new problems. It created a possible fertility reduction. I say possible because in 1979, before the one-child policy came in, there were 2.8 births per woman in 1979. If we go back a little farther back, sort of the 1950s, 1940s, China, it was 5 children per woman in China at that particular moment. But it had already shown to drop by 1979. And then in the middle of the 1990s, it was 1.5 children per woman. However, there are supposedly a lot of papers online that have observed that this wasn't due to the one-child policy, because you could find that same kind of decline in places like Thailand or some of the Indian states like Kerala and Tamil Nadu. Another thing that the one-child policy created was a gender disparity. The current estimate is that there are 30 million more men than women. So this has an impact on a whole bunch of stuff. And one of the things that it has an impact on is sex crimes. Because more frustrated men not getting what they need, they might get a little antsy and kidnap or push themselves onto women. I tried to find statistics for this. I couldn't. China doesn't keep those kind of statistics very open. And in fact, if you look at it and compare it to the per capita rate in the United States, of the things that I found, China's way below. So yeah, I just don't think that they're reporting their information. So, but it makes sense to me. Also, between 1980 and 2007, there was a huge growth. There was a boom in the orphanage market. I don't know what that means. Because of the laws and people wanting to avoid to pay penalties because they were very poor at the time, there was a lot of abandoning of children. And so a lot of orphanages started getting opened. It was a big boom in adopted kids. Most of the adoptions were international. There was an estimated 2 million children abandoned during these years while the one-child policy was being enacted. So 2 million children abandoned. Also, the question of elder care, as it was mentioned before. So less people to take care of the elderly. This causes a different problem called the 4-2-1 problem. Supposedly, because the elder facilities do not have enough people working in them to take care of the amount of people that are going to the elder facilities at the moment, they've calculated, or a lot of children are now responsible to take care of their parents and their grandparents. So you have one adult left with having to provide support for his or her parents, her two parents, and the 4 grandparents that come with those 2 parents. So it's a packed house, essentially. And then there is a question of unregistered children. This is a problem that the government really did create here. So an unborn child outside of the one-child policy often is not registered, again, to not pay the penalties. And it's not registered in the Chinese National Household Registration System. In this respect, they do not legally exist, and as a result, cannot access public services such as education, healthcare, and do not receive protection under the law. So they're illegal children. Illegal children, like, born on that particular land. And then, of course, sex-selective abortions. This has always been a story in China in general. Gender of the firstborn child in rural parts of China were impacted, whether the mother will seek an ultrasound for the second child. If the mother has a boy the first time, she's the possible second child, the child she can have, she's not going to have an ultrasound for the second one. But if she gets a female on the first one, she probably will have that one aborted, and then get an ultrasound for the next one to make sure the kid is not a female. So in the end, a madman like Hugo Drax, the guy you're seeing here, wanting to genocide the world with a biological weapon to repopulate it with stable, genetically perfect humans, is a one-dimensional, poorly written character. You know, you can't do much with poorly written characters. Oh, I'm sorry, that wasn't Hugo Drax. That's Prince Philip. Prince Philip. He was invited to the royal premiere on June 26, 1979 at the London Odeon, Lancaster Square. He was present at that theater for the opening of the film. This was 11 years before he pronounced those famous words that in the event that I'm reincarnated, I would like to return as a deadly virus in order to contribute something to solve overpopulation. Okay, folks, fasten your seatbelts, put your trays in the upright position. We're about to blow up a space station, and we'll have to I missed the joke. Whatever, let's watch a movie. Forget it. If you like what you see and you want to know more about film production, please follow the website link in the description below to learn more. While you're there, you can check out my show notes, where you can double check my references, comment, and act like the film critic I know you are.
stinks.
Also, all of the items on the website are affiliate links, so if you find anything of interest, please click on through. Finally, please subscribe, follow, like, share, comment, pray, and send good vibes to help us keep delivering great content.